If you know the definition of deconstruction but still can't recognize the deconstructed reading, this video is for you. Welcome to Reading Otherwise. In the previous lecture, we looked at what Derrida means by deconstruction. Today, we are going to build the vocabulary you'll need to actually identify and discuss deconstruction in a literary text. And don't worry, I won't give you 7 complicated definitions and ask you to memorize them. We'll take them one by one. Let's start with the term you absolutely need, binary opposition. A binary opposition is a pair of concepts presented as opposites. Good, evil, presence, absence, speech, writing, nature, culture. But for Derrida, the important question isn't simply what are the two opposites? The question is, are they really equal? Often, the term is treated as primary and other as secondary. For example, Western thought has traditionally privileged speech over writing. So when you are reading a text, don't stop at identifying the opposition. Look for the hierarchy. And that brings us to our second term, hierarchy. If one side of a binary opposition is treated as superior to the other, we have a hierarchy. Reason over emotion, man over woman, culture over nature, speech over writing. A deconstructive reading asks, why does this hierarchy exist? And then comes the more interesting question. Can the supposedly inferior term actually exist outside the superior one? If the answer is no, the hierarchy becomes much less stable than it first appeared. Now we come to one of Derrida's most famous and most irritatingly difficult terms, difference. Derrida combines two ideas here, difference and different. Let's make that simple. Take the word lion. We know what it means partly because it is different from other signs. But if I describe a person as a lion, the word can lead us towards ideas of strength, power, courage, authority, and so on. So when we try to explain one sign, we often move towards other signs. Meaning is produced through difference, but it is also continually deferred. That's difference. The important thing to remember is meaning exists, but it is never completely self-contained or finally fixed. And if meaning is always connected to other signs, we can understand our next term, trace. A sign carries the traces of the other signs that help constitute its meaning. Think again about light. We understand light partly through its difference from darkness. Darkness doesn't have to be physically present every time I say light. But the distinction still matters. So the absent term leaves a trace in the meaning of the present term. When reading a text, ask, what supposedly absent or excluded idea is still necessary for this meaning to work? Next, supplement. This one is particularly important because Derrida uses it to challenge the idea that something is complete in itself. A supplement appears to be an addition to something that is already complete. But if that thing needs the supplement, was it really complete in the first place? Think about writing. If speech is treated as the original and writing as merely an addition to speech, Derrida asks us to reconsider that relationship. Perhaps the supposedly secondary term reveals something missing from the supposedly complete one. So remember, the supplement doesn't simply add something, it can expose a lack in what seemed complete. Now aporia. This sounds terrifying, but the basic idea is actually quite useful. An aporia is a contradiction. Impose or point of undecidability that a text cannot easily resolve. Imagine a text apparently establishing one clear position and then producing something that makes that position difficult to maintain. You reach a point where both possibilities seem to demand recognition. That's where you should start looking for an aporia. So, when you are analyzing a text, ask, what does the text seem unable to make its own argument completely stable? Finally, logocentrism. This term refers to the Western tendency to privilege the idea of a stable, present, authoritative center of meaning. In very simple terms, we want there to be something behind language that can finally guarantee what a text means. Derrida questions that desire for a final center. And that's why terms like presence, origin, truth, now let's pull all of these terms together. Suppose you are reading a literary text and you notice a binary opposition. First, identify the opposition. Second, ask whether one side is privileged. Third, examine the hierarchy. Fourth, look for the traces of the supposedly excluded term. Fifth, look for moments where the hierarchy becomes unstable or reaches an aporia. And throughout the reading, remember difference. Meaning doesn't simply sit inside one word or one concept. It emerges through relationships with other signs and remains open to further movement. That's how these terms begin to function as tools of reading rather than definitions you memorize for an exact examination. So, don't think of deconstruction as simply saying everything is ambiguous. That's too weak. A deconstructive reading asks how a text constructs meaning and what hierarchies that construction depends on, and what the text itself makes those hierarchies unstable. Once you can recognize that movement, you are no longer just remembering Derrida, you're actually reading deconstructively. And that's where we'll go next.